What's up, moviegoers? Welcome to the Marchio podcast. I'm your host, Anthony. In today's episode of the Marchio podcast, I'm talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. It is the fifth installment in the Nightmare on Elm Street film series and follows Freddy Krueger using a now pregnant Alice Johnson's baby's dreams to claim new victims. Now, basically, Alice Johnson is the previous character from the fourth movie and one of Kristen Parker's friends from the third movie. So basically you could say that 3, 4, and 5 is its own trilogy, which it is, which they should have never have done. Now it's directed by Stephen Hopkins. The story is by screenwriter Leslie Boehm, and the movie was released August 11th, 1989. Has a runtime of 90 minutes, has a budget of $8 million, and the box office gross was $22.1 million. Now this movie is notable for being one of the final slasher movies of the 1980s. Now, the movie wasn't well received when it was released. It received mostly negative reviews from critics stating that the movie lost its feel and touch after its third entry. So when you say and you see a critic write that this movie lost its touch after the third movie, and this is the fifth movie in the franchise, that's really saying something. The film had more of a darker tone, and you can see it, and it was much more darker than the previous four films in the franchise. And basically a blue filter lighting technique is used in most of the scenes, and you can see that, especially in certain scenes that are, different and interesting. And basically the interesting thing is that seeing Alice Johnson's character return in this movie, as she's now pregnant. We also find that the Freddy Krueger, so-called, is seeing this nun, and we find out that this nun is Amanda Krueger, his mother. Basically, what happens was that the Freddy Krueger's mother was raped in a, asylum area, and she gave birth to, a serial killer rapist child. So basically, what happens is that Freddy Krueger finds his way into the child of, Alice Johnson. So now the good thing about the role of Alice Johnson is that the same actress came back to portray the role, which is good. That was supposed to happen with Patricia Arquette's character, Kristen Parker, but it did not. And basically how everything's captured and how everything's done in this movie is different. I didn't like this movie for what it was, in showing the dream child aspect and how Freddy Krueger uses a baby in order to kill new victims was weird and different and didn't sit well with me. It was more so a factor of, the Dream Master in the previous movie was different, it was good, and we had a subject lining under factor of how things worked. The good thing about this movie is that I really credit Robert Englund for coming back to the role of Freddy Krueger. You can tell he had more fun with this role. He was more outgoing, so to speak. And the weird thing about this movie is that the fourth movie was categorized as a fantasy slasher film. This fifth movie is categorized as a gothic slasher film. So you tell me how that, makes sense, because I don't know how that makes sense. But here's the thing. Every single year from 1984 had a Nightmare on Elm Street movie except 1986. 1986 didn't have a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. 1984 had the first movie. The second movie came out in 85. The third movie came out in 87. The fourth movie came out in 88. And the fifth movie came out in 89. Hey, what can I say? I'm sure Robert Englund was happy because he kept working during the 80s, which was great. Like I stated and like I said in the Dream Warriors podcast episode, that's when the series should have stopped. The only reason Wes Craven came back was to close out the story and close out the series, and that's why he brought back Heather Langenkamp as Nancy Thompson. That was a great way to end it. You bring back the original director and writer, you bring back one of the main characters. Great, end it. Don't start and don't think that part 3 is the start of a new trilogy. How? Who does that? Well, I guess these film writers and filmmakers do that, because that's what New Line Cinema did. Robert Shea took this and just battled it and beat it to the ground, which was horrifying and annoying. I mean, the box office didn't even, come back at all for this fifth movie. The first one was great. Second one was weird. Third one was the pinnacle of the Freddy Krueger movies. And then you have the fourth and fifth one, which was just the sequels to the third one. Because you see the same characters come back from the third and fourth into this fifth movie. And it's different. I did like how we find out who Freddy Krueger is in this movie by introducing the character of Amanda Krueger. Now, basically, Amanda Krueger is Freddy Krueger's mother, and she decides to become a nun, chooses Mary Helena as her religious name, and is assigned to Weston Hills Hospital. Amanda is accidentally locked inside with psychopaths and killers for several days at Christmas time. She is beaten and raped, and when she is found, she is barely alive and pregnant. And in 1942, September, she gives birth to Frederick Charles Krueger. She gives him up for adoption, rejecting her son because the circumstances of his conception make him an abomination to God and to man. Amanda follows his trial for the murder of several children in Springwood and subsequently hangs herself after his release. She actually bricks herself into a room in the tower of the hospital abandoned psychiatric wing of guilt where she dies. Her body is never found, and she has an empty plot in Springwood Cemetery. Like her son, her spirit is unrest and uneasy. And as an elderly nun, Amanda returns to help Neil defeat Freddy. She returns in the dream child in her young form, brought back by Freddy to resurrect him. Her son keeps her from telling Alice how to stop him. When Alice tries to find Amanda in her dreams, Freddy lures her away by attacking her friend. When Alice tries to fight Freddy, she sends Yvonne to Amanda's resting place to free her, using Alice's child and his power to revert Freddy into a child again. She basically absorbs himself into an attempt to contain him. So basically that's the fifth movie, A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. It's basically a story about how the origin of Freddy Krueger happened and started, and why he's using Alice Johnson's baby to, kill his victims. The movie was okay with storyline, but it didn't work. This movie should have been its own movie, featuring Freddy Krueger and knowing of an origin story. Because of all the Freddy Krueger movies that we have, there's not one movie that shows his origin. We get a slight tidbit of how he became who he is through unforeseen circumstances because of what he did. But other than that, it's nothing good and nothing great. Like I said, I'm very surprised Robert Englund came back to this role in part. And like I stated before, there was a Nightmare on Elm Street movie every year from 1984 that came out, except 1986. That year was skipped. There was no Nightmare on Elm Street movie that was released. So it goes to show that the, New Line Cinema definitely ran this franchise to the ground because it was the house that Freddy built. And Robert Shea saw it as an opportunity, and he ran with it. He just ran with it way too long and way too fast. So let me know in the comment section below what you think about A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. And did you enjoy it, and did you like it? And did you see the origin story of Freddy Krueger could have been done differently, and how we were introduced to his mother, Amanda Krueger? Let me know in the comment section below about the questions I just asked. And be sure you tune into the next episode of the Marchio podcast, where I talk about A Nightmare on Elm Street 6, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. And be sure you click that subscribe button and hit that notification bell for new videos and new podcast episodes on the Marchio Productions YouTube page. And follow Marchio Productions on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And follow me, Anthony, your host, on Instagram and Twitter at misterfilmstock. And follow the Marchio Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I'll leave a link to all the social media accounts in the description box below. You can check it out and follow along. Alright everyone, that does it for today's episode. I'm your host, Anthony. Thanks for tuning in.
Faster than a bastard maniac. More powerful than a loco madman. Yes. Super Freddy! Told ya! Comic books was bad for ya!